The pinnacle of communist-era Polish cinema came at its very end. The final decade of party rule was marked by both brutality and opportunity, with the 1980s beginning with the imposition of martial law.
The troops had moved in at midnight.
And ending with the victory of the Solidarity Union. Economic and moral crises seemingly went hand in hand, and the nation's post-war history was reconsidered afresh in daring films that often fell at the hands of the censors. It was in this context that Krzysztof Kieślowski delivered his Decalogue, an intimate epic of everyday life inspired by the Ten Commandments that transcended both political activism and scriptural trappings to hint at something truly universal. As if he were aware just how quickly the world was turning beneath his feet, Kieślowski worked at a frightening, self-destructive pace, completing 12 films in the space of a single year. By the time most domestic audiences saw Decalogue, the Polish People's Republic had ceased to exist. After the fall of communism, Kieślowski produced his final features, The Double Life of Veronique in 1991 and the Three Colors trilogy, released as Red, White and Blue across 1993 to 1994 in France. Decalogue is thus the capstone of his Polish career. It is the grandest expression of his concern for the ordinary citizens of the Polish People's Republic, but also it attempts a level of philosophical inquiry that was new even for Kieślowski. It picks up the social critique of his 1970s films while moving ever further away from outright political condemnation. There is something in Decalogue that evokes his earliest documentaries in their attention to the detail of everyday life combined with an unusual degree of stylized visual beauty. Stanley Kubrick famously declared the Decalogue a masterpiece, writing that Kieślowski and co-writer Krzysztof Kieślowski, quote, have the very rare ability to dramatize their ideas rather than just talking about them. They do this with such dazzling skill, you never see the ideas coming, and don't realize until later how profoundly they have reached your heart. Kieślowski was instrumental in Kieślowski's mature career and a driving force behind Decalogue. A lawyer, Kieślowski met the director while consulting on and eventually co-authoring his 1985 feature titled No End, about the martial law era trial of a Solidarity organizer. The film also saw the introduction into Kieślowski's orbit the composer Zbigniew Preisner, who would score Decalogue and eventually his French films. Determined to avoid overt political themes, the director and writer cast around for more allegorical material. It was the devout Catholic Kieślowski who landed upon the idea of a contemporary reimagining of the Ten Commandments. Crucially, while the Decalogue series was made for Polish television, it was funded by West German investors, which granted Kieślowski and Kieślowski a degree of authorship and creative agency rarely afforded by state broadcasters, a freedom essential to navigating the moral and philosophical scope of the project. Decalogue in its final form consists of 10 hour-long episodes, stylized with Roman numerals, each of which is nominally related to one of the biblical commandments. Episode 5 and 6 were later expanded into 90-minute feature films entitled A Short Film About Killing and A Short Film About Love, respectively. All 10 episodes are set in the same Warsaw Tower Block complex, with an overlapping ensemble cast. The 10 episodes had originally been intended for 10 different directors, but Kieślowski found himself unable to relinquish control over the project. He did, however, make sure to hire a different cinematographer for each film, with only Piotr Sobocinski returning for 2 episodes. As a result, the same setting becomes refracted through a range of visual palettes and compositional styles. In truth, it is easy to overstate the importance of Decalogue's biblical framing device. While some commandments, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, are tackled directly, the relevance of others to the on-screen drama is far from obvious. The understated tension between Pieszewic's more committed religiosity and Kieślowski's cool humanism keeps every scenario engaging over the 10-hour-plus runtime of the full series. Viewed as a whole, the clarity of conception and execution displayed by the writing-directing partnership is remarkable. 10 perfectly realized episodes of human comedy and tragedy, each standing alone while also working in symbiosis with the next. The expanded short film features demonstrate that each of the stories told here could be extended forward or backward in time without losing their power. In Decalogue 2, two characters share the following exchange.
Ciekawy dom. Jak każdy. W każdym domu, w każdym mieszkaniu jacyś ludzie. I tak dalej, i tak dalej. Właśnie.
In other words, the local resides in the universal, and vice versa. That is the significance of the scripture to Kieślowski. If the director arrived at this philosophical stance in part as a result of the political pressures of the 80s, then it was also an organic endpoint to his evolving fascination with the everyday life of communist Poland. Kieślowski had initially planned to make a career in non-fiction, and from 1968 until 1980, he directed more than 20 documentary shorts, TV films, and features about the working lives of ordinary Poles. From the direct interview style of 1977's From the Night Porter's Point of View to the experimental sociology of 1980's Talking Heads.
Ja jestem na skraju dwóch tajemnic, bo ta rzeczywistość naturalna, to, że jestem człowiekiem, to jest jedna rzecz. Ale jest druga rzeczywistość, w której tkwię mocno. To jest religia, to są sprawy wiary, sprawy stosunku do Pana Boga.
I zadawałem tam ludziom tylko dwa pytania. Kim jesteś i czego byś chciał? I oczywiście potem, jak już zrobiłem ten film, to się zastanowiłem sam nad tymi dwoma pytaniami. I właściwie, prawdę mówiąc, zrozumiałem, że nie potrafię na te pytania odpowiedzieć. A właściwie nigdy go nie uzyskałem i chyba wiem, że już go nigdy nie uzyskam.
The censorship that certain of these films were subjected to helped to convince Kieślowski to abandon documentary for fiction, as he saw it a more refined medium for truth-telling in an authoritarian state. His first fiction features, from Personnel 1975 through to No End, are often considered part of a loose grouping of critical voices that emerged in the second half of the 1970s, later dubbed the, quote, cinema of moral anxiety, which included the likes of Agnieszka Holland and Krzysztof Zanussi. Again, unassuming settings and unremarkable protagonists were key to the quiet discontent of the moment. The richness of Decalogue resists easy summary. Every viewer will have their favorites among the huge ensemble cast.
Tato! Tato! Wymyśl coś!
The series opens with one of its most heartbreaking episodes about the linguistics professor and amateur computer programmer Krzysztof, whose indoctrination of his precocious son into the world of scientific reason fails to prevent bitter misfortune. Death haunts many of the episodes, as does the spectre of romantic dissolution. Infidelity and empathetic ellipses proliferate throughout the tower block. The entanglements of romance and family tend to prompt moral reckoning in Kieślowski's world. The problem of proving maternity hangs over Decalogue 4. The violinist Dorota in Decalogue 2 ponders an abortion whilst her ailing husband teeters on the brink of death. Dorota's dilemma is restated directly by the ethics professor Zofia in Decalogue 8.
Nie ma idei, nie ma myśli, nie ma nic, co byłoby ważniejsze od życia dziecka.
Which also raises the spectre of the Holocaust, a reality never far from the minds of post-war Polish artists.
Kontynuujemy w takim razie nasz temat piekło etyczne. Kto z Państwa dziś jako pierwszy?
Throughout Decalogue, Kieślowski avoids easy judgment of his characters. His 1988 statement to critic Bożena Janicka that all films are made as if through glass captures not just the proliferating windows of the tower block through which we glimpse the lives of its inhabitants, but also his sense of cool remove from the intensity of the emotional turmoil behind each front door. The sheer range of human drama on display is encapsulated in the two short film expansions. A short film about killing is Kieślowski at his most brutal. The murder of a taxi driver by a young drifter named Jacek is recorded in unbearable detail, as is the agony faced by the criminal's idealistic lawyer Piotr in the face of the death penalty handed down to his client. Conversely, a short film about love is almost shockingly tender in the face of human frailty. 19-year-old Tomek is an orphaned postal worker who rents a room from his best friend's mother. Each night at 8:30, he watches through a telescope as the beautiful 30-something Magda, a resident of the neighboring tower block, brings home a succession of men. Erotic fixation soon turns to ardent adolescent love, and Tomek haplessly attempts to bridge the physical and emotional distances between himself and Magda, intercepting her mail and intruding on her liaisons. Once the pair meet, however, and the weight of Magda's romantic cynicism makes itself felt, Tomek is forced to confront the devastating gap between ideal and reality. The narrative structure that Kieślowski and Piasiewicz deploy here clearly recalls Alfred Hitchcock's gripping study of voyeurism in Rear Window, as well as the genre thrills of Hitchcock's postmodern disciple, Brian De Palma. But Kieślowski's own humanism overwhelms the potential seediness of the Tomek-Magda relationship. As critic Eric Hines notes, it's through his confusion over closing the distance that Tomek transgresses, but he's never guilty of watching. Lubashenko and Shapovalska give two of the finest performances of the director's career, and together with cinematographer Witold Ademek, Kieślowski finds not the grubbiness in the tower block, but rather its melancholic beauty. Decalogue 6 ends abruptly, with Tomek renouncing his love for Magda.
Ja już pani nie podglądam.
The expanded film version, however, allows us more time with Magda in the aftermath, as she begins to mirror Tomek's former fascination with her, leading to a stunning climactic scene in which the pair encounter one another in a rarefied moment of recognition. What Hines calls the love of pure empathy that asks only for the privilege of seeing its object, and that requires not even an acknowledgement of its active gaze. Tomek's telescope makes literal Kieślowski's notion of filming, quote, through glass, whilst Tomek and Magda's broader story, along with all the others that make up Decalogue, demonstrate that all along the object of Kieślowski's, quote, pure empathy was nothing less than Polish society itself. A short film about love is available now to stream for free on Klassiki as part of our 7-day free trial. Follow the link in the description to watch now or to view our full library of Eastern European films, from iconic classics to acclaimed contemporary titles.